Hey guys, tonight we're going to talk about the amazing life of a woman who was both a performer and a survivor. Most of the Western world misunderstood her, though. They thought she was a geisha, but she was actually something else. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Please tell me in the comments where you are and what time it is where you are. It's always interesting to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, turn off the bright lights and turn on a fan for a soft background hum. Let's start tonight's journey gently. You were born in Edo, the busy center of Japan, full of tea shops, rice traders, wandering monks, and at least 4 people per block who think they are reincarnated warlords. As a girl, you can choose from 3 exciting options for your future. You could marry someone boring, become a nun, and live with regret. Or go to the Okiya, the geisha house, and spend the next 20 years pouring tea for drunk aristocrats while pretending it's empowering. You're 6 years old. You still think bugs are interesting, and you have no idea that your parents have made a decision. You're going to be a geisha. Not today. Today, you're being made to walk through the streets in your best kimono, which is itchy and far too tight. But soon, your carefree life of snacks and naps will end. You will start a strict training to learn how to control your emotions. The Okiya looks more like a library, married a temple, and raised a child that grew up to be emotionally distant. The woman who opens the door is Oken, the geisha house mother. She can tell how much you're worth just by the way you bow. You try to smile. She doesn't. Your parents bow deeply, say a few words, and leave you behind like a polite hostage exchange. You have officially been handed over. You are not adopted. You are now owned by the company. Don't worry, you'll learn to deal with the pain. You're now a shikomi. That's a fancy word for a child who scrubs things. You will scrub floors, prepare baths, carry water, and occasionally cry into your sleeve. Obviously, it should be done quietly. Your job is to watch the geisha, never speak, and soak up everything. You sleep in the hallway, you eat last, and you owe the house money for the rice you just spilled. The geishas themselves seem to float past you as if they were from another world. Their hair is styled. They are quiet. Their gaze says, don't even think about breathing too loudly. You're just like a sponge, soaking up everything you see. You're learning. And if your knees don't give out, one day you might be able to walk through a room without being told to get the towels. Your days start before sunrise and end when your back hurts too much to move. You sweep the floor, make charcoal fires, wash kimono fabric that costs more than your soul, and fetch things. I always make sure to get slippers, water, tea, more water, the good sandals, and the other good sandals. By midday, you've walked more than most samurai do in a year, and if you make a noise, you're in big trouble. Shikomi must be silent. It's so quiet, like something out of a scary story. Only speak when you're asked to, and when you do, answer quickly, but not too quickly, or it might seem rude. Also, don't look directly at the senior geisha unless she's looking at you. If she is, it means you're looking too much. To be honest, blinking is a political act now. You haven't had any formal teaching. There is no classroom. Your whole education is based on watching, being embarrassed, and repeating. You can learn how to fold an OB by watching someone do it very quickly. You practice bowing until your spine starts to hurt. You try not to cry when you fail your 15th test, but you start to understand how they hold the fan, just so. Laughter is like a drumbeat in the way it is timed. Walking is all about the timing and coordination of your toes. You realize that being a geisha isn't just about being beautiful. It's about being precise, in control, and having the social skills of a diplomat working in a landmine factory. But you're still just a shikomi. You can't be seen until you're useful. And even then you're still kind of invisible, but now you have a rag in your hand. The older girls might be nice if you're lucky, or they might treat you like a walking warning. Either way, you should keep your head down and your ears open. Here's the secret. Everyone started somewhere. Even the most elegant geisha in the house once cleaned this exact floor while being shouted at for drying chopsticks the wrong way. So you put up with it all, and you wait for your chance to stop mopping and start being important. Now that you've got the hang of carrying tea and not doing much else, it's time to up your game. No, not dancing or playing instruments. Don't get too excited. First, you must learn how to sit still for hours without fidgeting or breathing too much. Welcome to posture training, an ancient Japanese tradition. It involves turning your knees into pretzels and your spine into bamboo. You kneel in Caesar, the formal sitting position where your legs are folded neatly beneath you, your back is straight, and your blood quietly flows more slowly. First, your legs go numb after 3 minutes. Then they start whispering threats. After 10, your legs have officially gone on strike. Geishas are graceful, so you shouldn't try to imitate them by shifting, stretching, or screaming. They don't use them. They don't wiggle. They tolerate pain as if it's a personal choice. You also start bowing all the time. There are many ways to bow, and each one is slightly different. A greeting bow, a thank you bow, an apology bow, and a please don't punish me for existing bow. You learn to lower your head to exactly the right angle, hold it for exactly the right number of seconds, and rise with the smoothness normally reserved for rice paper unfolding in a breeze. But of course you'll mess it up. Everyone does. You might bow too quickly or too slowly, or you might touch the floor with the tips of your fingers at the wrong angle. Someone will scold you in a way that is like a disappointed ghost. You will also learn how to sit during tea ceremonies. Keep your knees folded, even if you feel like your soul wants to leave your body. You have to move as if you are underwater. It's slow, smooth, and intentional. If you sneeze, congratulations. You have dishonored your ancestors. But between the pain and the screaming, something happens. You start to hold your head higher. You start to move more quietly and thoughtfully. You become less childish and more mysterious. This is where you start to understand. Geisha training isn't about performing tricks. It's about having control over your voice, your body, and how other people see you. You're learning how to disappear gracefully. After years of scrubbing floors, hurting your knees, and standing like a statue, you finally hear the words you've been longing for. You're ready to become a mom. It's like being told you've been promoted from ghost to human. Well done. You are now a MO, a beginner geisha. But, strangely, the real suffering has only just begun. First, I'll work on my hair. Your head will now be turned into a sculpture that is alive. Professional hairstylists arrive with their tools, and they seem calm. They twist your hair into the traditional Japanese Nihongami style, a very big structure that takes a long time to make and can be destroyed very quickly. And you can't sleep lying down anymore. No, you must use a takamakura. This is a wooden neck pillow designed to keep your head elevated so your precious hair doesn't touch anything, especially common sense. Sleeping like this is a test of willpower and neck strength. You get used to it in time. Now it's time for the outfit. Your new kimono is decorated with an embroidered animal. It's beautiful, heavy, and the person who designed it clearly didn't like shoulders. The sleeves are long enough to sweep a small garden. The obi sash is tied in a complicated knot that sits halfway up your back and weighs about the same as a toddler. Getting dressed each day requires help, often from 2 or 3 other people who have memorized the ancient art of wrapping fabric around a human body until it's 75% kimono and 25% regret. Then there are the kazashi, which are hair ornaments. These are beautiful, seasonal, and sharp enough to qualify as light weaponry. You wear them like a crown, but they also show your rank and how far you have got in your training. If you wear the wrong hairpin, everyone will know you have made a fashion mistake. As a Miko, your job is to watch, imitate, and occasionally serve tea while dressed like a cherry blossom that has come to life. You can't speak freely, laugh loudly, or ask questions. You are art, not words. But despite the discomfort, the aching scalp, and the inability to sneeze near flames, you feel something else. You can't see or hear them, but they're still there. People notice you, and not just because your outfit is visible from space. There's no sudden realization when you're a beginner that you're a proper apprentice geisha. It's more like a slow and boring promotion, with lots of formalities and stress. The day you officially become a mom is different. That day is special, and there's a lot of pressure. Imagine the Edo period's version of a debutante ball, but instead of dancing and punch, there's kneeling, sweating, and at least 2 full hours of hairstyling with hot wax. You've been training for years, you've bowed more times than a religious statue, and you've memorized the complicated way to pour tea without looking like you're pouring tea. You can finally go to Kyoto and meet the city's upper class. They will be judging you politely, intensely, and quietly, using folding fans. You wear your most fancy kimono, made of many layers of bright silk, which costs more than your birth family's home. It's so long that it feels like a heavy weight dragging you down. Your obi is tied in the Durari style, which is a long trailing sash that says, "Yes, I'm new here. Please admire my suffering." Your face is fully painted now. The white rice powder goes from the forehead to the neck. Add red and black to your eyes. The lips are painted in a perfect bow, but only the bottom lip at first, because apparently being elegant is a half-lip kind of thing. You walk through the streets in your ubo, those platform sandals that look like medieval torture devices, while everyone looks at you. It's not because you're famous, but because you're a new mom, and it's not common. Also, you're moving very slowly. It's the only speed you can choose. Then comes your misadashi, your formal debut ceremony. You meet clients for the first time, greet customers, and perform for elders who remember when their necks still worked. Every step, smile, and sip of tea is a test. And if you fail, you won't be yelled at. It's disappointing, which is worse. But somehow you survive. You get through the ritual, the performance, the parade. You don't trip, spill anything, or offend someone important. For a geisha, this is a huge success. And just like that, you're officially a mom. It's half child, half porcelain icon, and it's on display all the time. Being an MO means having a lot of responsibilities. For example, you have to pour tea, dance, and act like you don't hear rude comments. But nothing compares to your most important daily habit, washing your face. Your makeup routine is now like a military operation. First, cover your face, neck, and chest with a thick layer of white rice powder. It smells like chalk and feels like glue, but it will make you feel good. It dries quickly and sets like plaster. When it's on, you're not human anymore. You're a canvas. The second step is to do your eyebrows. Yours is covered in powder. New ones drawn on with charcoal. They look thin, dark, and serious, like they have a secret. The third step is for the eyes. You use a mixture of red and black pigment to draw lines on your lids. You must apply it carefully with a brush so that the lines are very thin. One twitch and you've gone from being an elegant apprentice to a haunted raccoon. And then the lips. As a junior MO, you're only allowed to paint the bottom lip. Why? It's all about tradition. There is also some talk about being modest and not thinking too highly of yourself. You paint it red and carefully shape it into the shape of tiny bow. It's considered beautiful. It also makes eating look like a complicated art installation. Mistakes are not allowed. Smudge your lip. Start again. The eyeliner is not applied evenly. This is not acceptable. Eyeliner hadn't been invented yet. You're using powdered minerals mixed with spit and despair. When you're done, you look in a mirror and see something that looks ancient and scary. A doll. A white, fragile, beautiful doll that is as strong as a dancer and eats as many calories as a squirrel every day. But here's the thing. Under the mask, you have the power to learn. This look is very striking. It says, "I'm a combination of tradition and performance, and I will judge your clumsy chopstick technique." The makeup isn't for vanity. It's for armor. It makes you stand out from other women. It tells everyone that you're here to perform, not take part. It also tells your paws that they are no longer needed. I hope you weren't too attached to breathing through your skin. You don't just wear this face for yourself. You wear it so that people forget you're only 15 and start treating you like art. At first, you might think that the geisha's most important tools are her beauty, her kimono, or maybe the sharp metal hairpin she keeps purely for decoration. But you'd be wrong. She has two real weapons. The shamisen is a Japanese instrument that makes awkward men feel interesting. You learn the shamisen, a three-stringed instrument that looks like a weaponized spatula and sounds like a sad banjo. Playing it well requires grace, rhythm, and fingers that don't cramp. You practice for hours every day, making noises that start as a cat in distress and slowly become the kind of ambient sound you would expect. Your teachers are cruel. One wrong note, and you'll hear a sigh. If you make a mistake, you might get a raised eyebrow. If you make 3 mistakes, you have to tune the instrument again until it sounds better. But music is only half the equation. The other half is about conversation. You're not just learning how to talk. You're learning how to talk around things, how to flatter without lying, how to suggest without promising, how to keep a man interested in a conversation without letting him realize that you're thinking about tomorrow's dance moves while nodding politely. You're so subtle. It's like you're a martial artist. If a client says he's rich, you smile gently and change the subject to the moon. If he tries to flirt too boldly, you compliment his sandals and offer more sake. You are the queen of graceful deflection. And the poetry, you learn hundreds of poems about flowers, rivers, and heartbreak. You can quote Basho while you're making tea and still have enough energy to notice who's had too much to drink, all the while keeping your back straight and your voice louder than you would normally speak. You will have realized by now that being a mom isn't about entertaining. It's about managing your own emotions, those of your clients, and the rooms. You can read moods more quickly than you can read syllables. You know when to laugh, when to stop, and when to pretend you didn't hear something scary. This is your new life. He is both a musician and a therapist, but he is best known for his performances. And the scary part is you're getting really good at it. Ah, yes, the danner. The word sounds elegant, a little mysterious, and just polite enough to hide what it actually means. A rich man who supports your career in a way that makes it hard for you to say no to him. You learn about the idea at the start of the book. A dana is a respected man who appreciates the arts, pays for your training, and helps with the expensive costs of kimono, hair ornaments, and general survival. In return, you're expected to keep him company, make him feel important, and ideally not run away. It's not romantic. This isn't a book by Jane Austen. This is a business deal. You can't choose your danner. The house chooses. Your Akrian is like a top wine expert, sniffing out quality, wealth, and social status. You, meanwhile, are told to smile and pretend that the man in front of you, who is 40 years older than you and breathing heavily, is fascinating. I should say that not every dana expects anything in return. Some of them are real fans of the arts who just like spending time with a smart, funny woman who can talk about poetry and politics without getting emotional or stopping the conversation. Others are not. The rules are unclear, nobody talks about them, and the pressure is huge. You owe money for your house. You owe your future to them. You owe your knees, which are currently throbbing under another 10 pounds of fabric. You will learn how to keep your emotions in check. You keep things friendly and respectful. You become very good at making men feel adored while keeping your true feelings hidden behind a smile. If you could tax emotional labor, you'd bankrupt the shogun. Sometimes it works out. A sponsor might support you for years, protecting you from financial ruin and giving you some space to make it through. Other times, you learn to switch off and nod along to a story about grain taxes. Either way, the system isn't about love. It's about using your strength to get what you want. The only way to survive it is to learn how to make things better for yourself, all while wearing lots of clothes and pretending the room isn't on fire. One day, someone hands you a pair of shoes that look like small wooden buildings and says, "Put these on." They're called okubo, huge platform sandals made of wood, which should not exist. These sandals are not for comfort, but for ceremony, elegance, and maybe even revenge. They are worn exclusively by MO, which means that if you're wearing them, you're expected to walk across the streets of Kyoto without wobbling, tripping, or bursting into tears. The Okobo make you taller, stronger, and less human. You no longer walk like a person. You glide like a religious parade. The goal is to move with such grace that no one notices you're actually fighting for your life with every step. They don't have any cushioning, but they don't. This is Edito, Japan. Your feet hurt. Your calves are in pain. Your balance becomes a full-time job. It's very slippery when it's raining. Going to the tea house is tricky because the stone streets are slippery. It's like being on an Olympic obstacle course. The horses make a sharp clop sound on purpose. When an MO walks down the street, people know that the sound of their footsteps is your new soundtrack. It's beautiful. It's traditional. It also lets everyone in the area know where you are. Being subtle is not important. Your legs will get used to it. Sort of. You'll find that you have muscles in your ankles that you didn't know you had. You learn to fall with dignity. You get really good at turning corners slowly, smoothly, and with just the right amount of exaggerated foot movement. And just when you think you've got it down, someone adds a 12-pound object to your waist and makes you go to a client dinner with 3 flights of stairs. Wearing Akko is something that everyone has to do at some point. It's also a public reminder that you're still learning your job. Geishas wear flat shoes because they have earned the right to not suffer so visibly. You're still earning it. You wouldn't stomp around. Let's be clear, a geisha is an entertainer. You perform, you dance, you sing, you pour sake with elegance and flirt in a subtle way. You're like a walking work of art. Your power lies in restraint. You say just enough. You reveal just enough. You're somewhere between admiring and disapproving. A courtesan Orin is a high-class escort who knows how to make their clients happy. Their job involves lots of different tasks, but there's one big difference. Their relationship usually ends in the bedroom. Yours ends with applause, a bow, and sore feet. The way it looks doesn't help. They both wear fancy kimonos. Both of them have fancy hairstyles. Here's a handy summary of the main points. If the obi is tied to the front, she is a courtesan. It's easy to access. If it's tied in the back, she's a geisha. Slow exit. You're welcome. But none of that matters when you're in a room full of men who watched one bad movie and think that geisha is a code for exotic invitation. So, you learn to politely correct someone without making them feel like they taught you something. It's all about the words. You say things like, "Ah, how kind of you to be curious." Our traditions are quite different from that. Smile, sip, redirect, repeat. You will have to explain this many times in your career. It will always be necessary. But each time you do it with kindness, you put the boundary back in place, one easy sentence at a time. Being a geisha means never getting angry, even when someone thinks you are something you're not. As a maiko, a young apprentice geisha, and eventually a geisha, you are expected to master music, dance, etiquette, and the delicate skill of looking delighted while listening to a man talk about rice terrace for 2 hours. But your most useful and least taught skill is learning to say no without using the word no. You can't just reject someone. That would be rude and ungraceful. No one pays a geisha to be blunt. Your value lies in subtlety, in suggestion, in being able to turn down a suggestion without making it obvious. Let's say a client gets bold. Maybe he leans in a little too far, compliments your eyes a little too often, or says the classic, "Perhaps we could meet somewhere more private." You don't hit him. You don't shout. That's amateur hour. Instead, you smile, tilt your head, and say something like, "Ah, you must be very popular with women." This sentence has no meaning, but makes him feel good, changes the subject, and buys you 10 seconds to refill his cup and pretend that never happened. Another great one. "Oh no, I'm very busy that day." This works even when he hasn't specified a day. Geishas are always very busy because they have a secret and mysterious schedule, where you just laugh like you always have. A soft, amused chuckle, followed by a gentle shake of the head, and then they change the subject. It's a dance where you lead but they don't realize. After a while, you start to find it easy to avoid giving direct answers. You can reject someone 3 times in a row and still make them feel like they're the guest of honor. It's tiring, yes, but it's a form of art that has been passed down from woman to woman like a secret spell book written in body language and subtle hints of rudeness. Here's the truth. A geisha's job isn't to indulge desire. The aim is to control it, direct it, and make the room feel magical while keeping a firm grip on the wheel. And if you can't think of anything, just smile, bow, and say, "What an interesting thought." That usually works. The room looks calm and relaxing. It has wooden walls, soft lighting, and the quiet sound of shamisen playing in the background. But don't be fooled. It's a battlefield, but not with swords or shouting. No, geisha wars are quieter, but just as painful, like being slowly assassinated with compliments. Every geisha house is like a small world with its own rules. There are lots of different types of people, and there's always a lot of fighting and people trying to get one up on each other. You're surrounded by women who are intelligent, competitive, and trained to keep smiling, even when they're not happy. Did someone borrow your obi, a traditional Japanese belt, without asking? Oh, how considerate. Did another mum arrive to dinner with the same seasonal hairpin? How strange. Did your shamisen solo suddenly get given to someone else at the last minute? It's just a misunderstanding. It's the kind that always seems to favor the popular girl. You learn quickly. Not all smiles are kind. Not all compliments are real. And never leave your cosmetics unattended. There's a code, of course. You don't scream or slap. That's for people who haven't been trained. Here, revenge is given in a smart way. A haiku is a type of poem. If you make a mistake in one of these poems, you can add an extra syllable. This is what happened in this poem. The poet also made a mistake in the steps they were practicing. A quiet suggestion to a customer that you might have heard something interesting about that other Mo's behavior at the last tea ceremony. Rumors spread quickly. You try to stay calm, but you'll end up getting caught up in it. Maybe you're the new favorite. Maybe your dance was too good. Maybe someone's just in a bad mood, and suddenly your sandals are gone. Was that just a coincidence? You can survive by being gracious in the right way. You can compliment someone while secretly saying the opposite. Your new kimono is very striking. I could never wear something so daring. Eventually, you'll rise above it, literally. As a full geisha, you'll have a higher rank than the apprentices, and you'll have your own room and clients. You'll also have fewer accidents and spills on your outfit. But until then, welcome to the battle of the fans. They don't say anything. They're ruthless, but they fight with style, timing, and sometimes they'll raise an eyebrow to get their point across. You don't need armor here. You need a mirror, a memory, and the ability to say thank you like it's a warning. After years of kneeling, bowing, smiling, and trying not to scream into your obi, the day finally arrives. You're no longer Ammo. You're now a geisha. The change is small. There was no big parade or fireworks to celebrate. One day, You wake up and realize that instead of being the girl in training, you're the one everyone else is training towards. And, strangely, your knees still hurt. Your wardrobe changes. The brightly colored, high-sleeved emo kimono that made you look like a walking flower arrangement is now a thing of the past. Your new look is more subtle and elegant, like you've finally earned the right to dress like someone with opinions. Thank goodness for your hair. It's not a weekly sculpture made from wax and willpower anymore. You now wear a wig. Yes, a wig. It's heavier than your head and still takes a lot of time and effort to style. But at least you can sleep like a normal person again, which is to say poorly and on a futon. But the biggest change is that you now perform alone. You don't follow anymore. You are the leader. You're expected to host, entertain, and charm people without help. Your Shamsun solos are longer. Your conversations are wittier. You must be calm, confident, and in control. Clients no longer see you as cute. They see you as powerful. It's not like in a story where someone gets killed with a sword or in a castle where people are burned at the stake. It's more like how a raised eyebrow can ruin a conversation. You've got subtlety down. You've turned grace into a weapon. People listen when you speak. Actually, it's when you choose to speak. Geishas know how to use power in the right way. Don't talk. This new status brings new problems. You must help and guide the younger MO. You must smile at clients you've already smiled at lots of times. You must take on the responsibility of protecting and continuing the traditions and performances that have been passed down to you over thousands of years. But deep down, something's different now. You're not pretending anymore. You have become the person the OIA has shaped you to be. She's not just a woman in a kimono, but a living symbol of elegance, mystery, and emotional manipulation. You're no longer in training. You are the tradition. So you've survived. You've danced, poured tea, smiled through centuries of tradition, and avoided tripping an okable long enough to reach the unspoken chapter in every geisha story. What should I do now? Here's a secret that nobody tells you. Geishas don't really retire, not in the traditional sense. There's no ceremony where someone hands you a gold fan and a thank you note. You don't get a pension. You just slowly disappear from the public eye. Some geisha become teachers. You become the one who can easily correct someone's bow angle just by looking at them. You play the shamisen for the first time. You know the person in front of you is thinking about lunch. You become the legacy, the living proof that grace ages well and outlives fashion. Others become stay-at-home moms. The Oka-san. Yes, her. The woman who once judged your bow like it was a criminal offense. And now you're standing by the sliding door, looking at the new shikomi and wondering if the rice pot is burning. You are in charge of the house. You decide the rules. You decide who gets to go first and who has to clean up the entryway again until they learn how to walk without making a stampede of noise. Some geisha marry secretly. They might choose a former danker who is still alive and has the manners not to ask how much everything costs. You swap one kind of performance for another. Geishas have a special way of smiling, even when they're doing everyday things like cleaning. They're always calm and collected, but you can still see they're thinking about everything. You host more small gatherings. You become less focused on how you're doing and more on just being there. You don't say much, but means a lot. Just by nodding your head, you can change the mood of the room. People notice when you're not around. There is no big finale, no final moment to call a night. You just become a shadow, still wrapped in silk, still moving like a poem with ankles. Even when you don't appear in public much, people still know who you are. Younger geishas have taken over, but they still do the moves you taught them. At this point, your knees will be permanently bent like the traditional Japanese floor mats called tatama mats. Your back straightens on instinct. Your voice sounds nice and strong. It's not because it's loud, but because it rarely needs to be. You're more than just a geisha now. You're a memory made visible. You won't find your name written on stone or in textbooks. You won't be popular. There's no video of you pouring tea with style or reciting poetry between shamus and chords. But your legacy isn't the kind that needs volume. The next girl is tired. She has been standing for too long on sore legs. She's trying not to smudge her lipstick as she tries to smile, even though she's exhausted and looks charming. The fan opens in a way that is quiet and precise. It's a gesture that's older than most empires. It lives in the quiet spaces between words at a party, where your presence still changes the atmosphere, even if no one remembers your first day or the name of the client who bought your first seasonal comb. Your job was never to be loud. It was an unforgettable experience, but not in a way that most people could easily explain. Make a simple thing like dinner seem like a special event, and a simple look like a strong message. But you survived. You made it through the training, the weight of tradition, and those shoes that try to kill you. You survived people assuming things about you, the competition, clients who mistook performance for permission, and rumors that never seemed to fade as fast as they were invented. But most of all, you lived elegantly in a world that demanded perfection and silence. You created space for confidence. You created a life of performance and resistance without ever raising your voice. And maybe no one will mention your name when they tell the story of Kyoto, but someone will still drink tea in that way. Someone will come in wearing a kimono without making a noise. Someone will smile at you with a mysterious look and say just enough without saying anything more. And in that moment, you'll still be there, not as a ghost, but as a legacy. Forget romantic meals or songs under the moonlight. In ancient Sumer, the birthplace of civilization, marriage was more about record-keeping than romance. Love was not compulsory. Contracts were not. The Sumerians were the first people we know of to make marriage official with written agreements. They lived in what is now southern Iraq over 4,000 years ago. When we say written, we mean pressed into wet clay using a stylus. These were not declarations of eternal love. They were used to record business deals. The uniform tablet often spelled out exactly what each party was bringing into the union. And no, unconditional love was never one of the listed assets. The bride came with money, animals, fabric, servants, or land. The groom's family might add a bride price, which was less a sign of goodwill and more a deposit. If the marriage didn't work out, the tablet clearly explained what was lost, refunded, or taken back. Yes, Sumerian marriages came with early versions of prenuptial agreements. Your love life could be audited, but the Sumerians weren't just interested in simple transactions. Marriage was very important for keeping society in order. Women were expected to be loyal and able to have children. Men were expected to provide for their family and protect them, or at least not embarrass them in public. If a wife was unfaithful, she could be punished very severely, even to the point of being drowned. You can get a divorce, but only if you can prove that there's a good reason for it. We grew apart, and that wasn't enough. Weddings themselves were small and simple. There is no fancy decor or white veils. The couple would move in together and perform rituals, possibly calling on deities like Inanna or Enlil. But the marriage only really began when the community recognized the union, and the contract was filed like an ancient tax return. The Sumerians saw marriage as more of a legal obligation than a personal journey. Your union was an important part of the system of inheritance, farming, and religious order. Your husband or wife is a partner in social strategy, a teammate in a world where surviving floods and feeding goats was more important than candlelit poetry. In ancient Egypt, marriage wasn't just accepted by society. It was also mirrored in the heavens. The gods themselves got married. Isis and Osiris, Nut and Geb. Even chaos had a soulmate. The Egyptians believed that pairs of gods were in charge of keeping the world in balance. and they thought that human marriages should do the same. That's a lot of pressure for a couple trying to stop their cats from eating the sacred grain. People thought marriage was the best social arrangement. It was expected that men would marry young, ideally before they had a chance to do too much damage as bachelors. Women got married in their early teens, and while love wasn't the main focus, they did value companionship and affection. The Egyptian love poetry was surprisingly tender. One poem says, "My heart beats faster when I think of you." Another says, "She has stolen my heart with her hair." These are not exactly tender bios, but they are a start. Legal documents were often involved, especially among the upper class. The Egyptians had the same kind of contracts as the Sumerians. These contracts clearly stated what a property would be worth, how much land a person would get if they died without a family, and what the terms of a divorce would be. But unlike Sumer, Egyptian women had important legal rights. They could own property, start divorce proceedings, and take legal action against their husbands for neglect. Even if she was a queen, an Egyptian woman could take her husband to court if he didn't provide bread, beer, or, most importantly, oil. Another interesting thing about the time was that royal families often got married within the family. Pharaohs often married their sisters. And no, it wasn't because there weren't many people to choose from. The reason is to copy the gods. Just as Isis married her brother Osiris, a royal union between siblings was believed to keep the divine bloodlines pure. This meant keeping the same genetic genes and avoiding any genetic risk. The wedding ceremony itself wasn't complicated. There was no special blessing from a priest or a big show. A couple is considered married once they move in together and start living as a couple. That's it. There were no doves, no cake, and no throwing of bouquets. The gods didn't need a big celebration to approve. The main reason for getting married was to have children. They don't want love, partnership, or to find personal fulfillment. They just want money. The more, the better. If your wife couldn't have a baby, you might take a mistress or marry a second wife. Love is not necessary. It's very important to know your family history. In most ancient cultures, marriage was a family matter. In Sparta, it was a military operation. If Sumerian marriage was a business deal and Egyptian marriage a copy of a religious practice, then Spartan marriage was a way of surviving, combined with the idea that the state was strong and that men had strong stomach muscles. Here's how it worked. Spartan boys were taken from their families when they were 7 and sent to the AOG, a brutal training system designed to produce elite warriors who could kill with a spoon and eat raw roots without flinching. At the same time, girls were also taught wrestling, javelin throwing, and to make sarcastic jokes. The idea wasn't just to make it strong for the sake of it. It was about making healthy babies. A weak child was a problem. A strong child was a future Spartan. So marriage wasn't about the romantic atmosphere or finding your soulmate. It was a type of breeding that was officially required. The state even decided that the best age to get married is around 30 for men and early teens for women. Romantic? No. The wedding ceremony was as strange as you'd expect from people who thought iron bars made good money. Here's what happened. The bride's head was shaved, and she was wearing a man's cloak and sandals. Then she was left alone in a dark room. The groom would sneak in at night, get married, and then sneak back out before sunrise, going back to his barracks full of men. Even after they got married, Spartan men didn't live with their wives. The relationship was built on secrecy and quick visits, like an ancient version of Tinder with a curfew. Why all the secrecy? The idea was to keep desire alive. If men were too familiar with each other, they might become soft, and softness was not acceptable in Sparta. The mystery made things interesting, or so the logic went, though modern therapists might have questions. Spartan women had more power than women in other ancient societies, despite the odd ritual. They could own land, run estates, and insult men in public without being killed. Love poems weren't popular, but witty poems were. Spartan women were known for being very clever. One of them told her husband, "Come back with your shield or on it." That's basically the ancient Greek version of "don't embarrass me." In ancient India, marriage was more than just a personal union. It was a sacred duty, a spiritual journey governed by Dharma, the cosmic law. Marriage was seen as one of the most important rites of passage in the Vedic tradition. These rites of passage, called samsara, were seen as necessary for fulfilling one's responsibilities to family, ancestors, and society. People didn't get married easily. It wasn't just a contract between two people, but a bond between two families, two lineages, and sometimes two whole villages. It was meant to uphold Varna Dharma, the social and moral order, ensuring stability through caste alignment, ritual propriety, and mutual obligation. Arranged marriages were common, and horoscopes were used to match partners. Astrologers looked at how the stars and planets were arranged to see if they were suited to each other. The idea was that if everything in the universe was in harmony, then there would be peace on Earth. People thought that a good match would make the couple and their family happy and rich. The wedding ceremony was a complicated ritual that was based on symbols, and it was all about the sacred fire. The couple would take 7 steps, with the sapardi going around the fire. At each step, they would make a promise to help each other grow stronger, share their wealth, be honest, have good children, enjoy life together, and be best friends for life. Following these steps, the two were considered to be spiritually united. Sri Dharma Patni's role was to be a partner and a moral guide. She was in charge of the house, did religious duties, and was very important in making sure the family kept their religious traditions. Even though she was a housewife, she was seen as having an important role to play in the community. The husband was expected to protect his wife and provide for her, and to uphold the traditional values of his culture through his behavior. Polygamy was common among the rich and powerful, but monogamy was seen as the best way to be. Widows were expected to live simply, although this was not always the same in different places and times. The practice of sati, where a widow would burn herself alive on her husband's pyre, was uncommon in ancient times. It only appeared much later and was not part of Vedic beliefs. In ancient China, marriage was not a private matter. It was a very traditional institution that was based on Confucian beliefs, ancestor worship, and a strict family hierarchy. Marrying someone was not just about falling in love or having kids. It was to honor the past and secure the future, with the help of the living and the dead. The main reason for getting married was to make sure the family line continued. This is also known as filial piety. Shao insisted that a son must get married and have boys to keep his family's rights. If a man didn't do this, he would disappoint his parents and risk breaking the family's spiritual rules. Ancestors had to be fed and honored. If a family didn't have children, it was seen as a sign that something was wrong with them, like a broken chain in a family tree. The young couple never made decisions about getting married. Families employed matchmakers. These matchmakers negotiated the terms, inspected backgrounds, and consulted astrological charts. If the stars and planets were not aligned properly, it was thought that getting married would be dangerous. It wasn't about chemistry, but about timing and duty. The 6 rites of traditional Chinese marriage showed how complex the ceremony was. First, someone popped the question. Then they shared their names, did some divination, promised to be together, exchanged gifts, chose a date, and finally got married. Each step in the process involved rituals, symbolism, and precise communication between families. It could take months or even years. On the wedding day, the bride wore red, the color of joy and luck, and traveled in a decorated sedan chair to the groom's house. She was covered, didn't speak, and didn't take part in the ceremony. When they arrived, the couple bowed their heads, 3 times. First to heaven and earth, then to the parents, and finally to each other. These branches symbolize the order of loyalty. First think about the world, then your family, and finally yourself. When a woman got married, she went to live with her husband and was expected to obey his parents as if they were her own. Her job was to have sons, look after the home, and do her work quietly. While some women gained respect through age or motherhood, their position was still clearly defined by a male-dominated society. Divorce was rare and shameful. A man could dismiss his wife for disobedience or infertility, but a woman had no such right. The marriage bond was respected, but the balance of power was off. In ancient Japan, marriage was shaped by customs and traditions, not by laws or religious beliefs. There was a strong respect for nature and ancestors. The Japanese wedding tradition is based on Shinto beliefs, the indigenous spiritual beliefs of Japan. In the past, it was less about formal contracts and more about purity, harmony, and social cohesion. In Shintoism, a religion practiced in Japan, it is believed that divine spirits, known as kami, live in all things. This includes rivers, trees, mountains, and even people. A harmonious marriage was seen as being in line with the natural order. It was very important to be pure and clean for every important step in life, including marriage. In the past, marriages were arranged by families, not romantic partners. The goals were to build practical alliances, consolidate land, and continue the family line, especially in elite families. But compared to other nearby cultures, Japan gave women a relatively higher status. In the past, women could own property, run estates, and have a say in how things were done in their homes. The traditional marriage process was called mukwari, or groom entering the bride's family home. In this tradition, the groom moved into the bride's family home, which is the opposite of the more common patrilocal traditions found in other parts of Asia. This showed how important it was to keep the same family in charge in some areas, especially among the most powerful families. But over time, this changed and the bride started living with the groom's family. This was happening at the same time as more traditional ideas about gender were becoming more common. Shinto wedding rituals are all about purification and respect. The couple would take part in a special ceremony called a sansenkudo, where they would drink sake, a type of rice wine, in 3 sips from 3 different cups. Every time they drank a little bit of the wine, it was a sign of their friendship and family. There were no traditional wedding vows, but the ceremony symbolized unity and mutual respect. Unlike in other cultures, where marriage customs were rigid, early Japanese marriage customs were flexible. Some people in charge practiced polygamy, but it was not part of the law. Divorce was not usually recommended, but it was possible, especially if one partner could not have children or the couple was not suited to each other. But public harmony and family honor were always priorities. It was important to handle the separation in a careful way. In ancient Rome, marriage was not just a personal achievement. It was an important part of civic life, connected to law, social class, and public duty. Romans saw marriage as a reflection of the social order. This meant that marriages were arranged, property was transferred, and family lines were kept under the control of the state and the patilius. In Rome, the man in charge of the family could have different legal types of marriage. In the old days, women would leave their families to become legally responsible to their husband or father. This is known as kamano. She was no longer legally part of her birth family and was treated like a daughter in her husband's family. He took over her property. But over time, Senaminu became more popular. In Senaminu, the wife was still under her father's authority, but she had more legal independence. This change happened because of changing ideas and the growing wealth of important Roman women. Weddings were full of tradition and meaning. The bride wore a veil called the flamium, which was a bright shade of red. Her hair was parted into 6 sections, with a spear in the middle. This is a nod to tradition and the martial roots of Roman culture. The joining of hands, dextrum iuntio, was a symbol of their union. Offerings were made to household gods, especially Juno, the goddess of marriage. A formal parade led the bride to her new home, where she was greeted with fire and water, symbols of purity and life. For the rich and powerful Romans, getting married was a political move. People in high positions used marriages to make alliances stronger and increase their influence. Personal feelings, while not unimportant, were often less important. Even emperors arranged marriages to gain political power, often ignoring what they wanted. In Roman marriages, women were expected to be modest, loyal, and dedicated to running the household. But Roman women, especially those married under the Cinemanus system, could own property, inherit money, and even start divorce proceedings. Divorce was common and socially acceptable, as long as it was handled with dignity. In your place, Gas, I am Gia, the bride who used to make vows. But if things got bad, they would often split up quickly and without warning. For the ancient Hebrews, marriage was more than just a social agreement. It was a very important agreement that was guided by divine law. Marriage was a very important part of religious life, family, and moral order, and was based on the traditions of the Hebrew Bible. It was a relationship that reflected not only human connection, but also the lasting bond between the people of Israel and their God. People thought that marriage was an important part of following the commandment to have children and increase in number. It was expected of all men to get married early. Love was important, but it wasn't the main focus. Following God and looking after my family were the most important things. A proper marriage kept the tribe's identity strong, made sure that property was passed on correctly, and kept the community's values strong. Arranged marriages were common. These were arranged by families who focused on family ties, reputation, and property. In some cultures, a bride price, called the moher, is paid by the groom to the bride's family. This is not a purchase, but a way for the groom to show he is committed and to offer compensation. Women often got married in their early teens, while men were slightly older and had already started earning money to support family. Weddings were a private matter and usually happened at the bride's house. After the ceremony, there was a party to celebrate. The rituals were all about being happy, making connections, and getting blessings. They included drinking wine, singing, and reading religious texts. A written contract was used to outline the husband's responsibilities, such as providing food, clothing, and having conjugal rights. It also protected the wife's money interests in case of divorce or widowhood. Although patriarchy was a big part of Hebrew society, women had an important role in their families. The woman of valor, described in Proverbs, was wise, hardworking, and respected. While polygamy existed, especially among early leaders like Abraham and Jacob, monogamy became more common over time, particularly after the Babylonian exile. Divorce was allowed, but not recommended. A man can get a divorce if certain conditions are met. But this process needed religious approval, and there were legal limits to make sure the woman was not left in a bad situation or dishonored. In the past, marriage was a very important part of life for the ancient Celts. It was a shared and symbolic event that was connected to the natural world, the Celts' tribal loyalty, and their traditional laws. It was less of a fixed thing and more of a flexible, adaptable connection that was shaped by personal choice, social responsibility, and seasonal traditions. Celtic marriage customs varied a lot across different tribes and regions, from Ireland to Gaul to the Scottish Highlands. This is unlike the strict legal codes of Rome or the cosmic obligations of India. But there were some things that never changed, working together, having children, and being brave. The Celts saw marriage as a very important promise, often made with the help of tribal leaders, druids, and the gods of the land and sky. A marriage could be between one man and one woman, monogamous, or between one man and more than one woman, polygamous, depending on how rich and important the people involved were. In the past, it was normal for a man to have more than one wife. Each wife would have her own family and would have a certain rank or status. But there were clear rules, and everyone agreed to them. Women weren't passive. Celtic women often had legal rights, including owning property, getting a divorce, and even being able to start a marriage. One interesting thing about Celtic union was the trial marriage. This is an arrangement where couples can live together for a year and a day to see if they want to get married. If either partner was unhappy, they could leave without feeling ashamed. This was a very modern idea for the time, because it focused on the agreement of both people and whether they were right for each other, rather than just being together forever. Ceremonies often happened at the same time as seasonal festivals like Beltane, a fire rite marking the start of summer and fertility. To symbolize purification and union, couples would jump over flames or walk between two bonfires. People thought that these rites would make marriages stronger, fruitful, and in harmony with nature. Marriage contracts, especially among elites, were made official and could include things like dowries, shared property, and inheritance. Unlike many ancient societies, Celtic law recognized mutual responsibilities between spouses. If a woman was mistreated or not given what she needed, she could take her case to a tribal court. Celtic marriage was always a spiritual thing. Vows were not just personal. They were connected to the land, their community, and the gods. The couple's marriage was just one part of a much bigger picture of land and family, and their loyalty was a promise not only to each other, but to the important balance that kept the world in place. Malbork Castle didn't originally come from the forests of Poland. It actually came from the Holy Land, where it was built in the hot sun. The Teutonic Order was formed in the late 12th century during the chaos of the Third Crusade. The order was first set up in 1190 by German crusaders who were caring for wounded Christian soldiers in Acre. It soon became a military monastic force. He was like a nurse and a knight, and he was completely devoted to spreading Christianity. But the Holy Land was slipping away. The Tunisian Knights had no clear purpose as Muslim armies under Saladin took back territory and European powers lost interest. They were still enthusiastic, but things were about to change. In 1226, the Polish Duke Conrad of Movia saw an opportunity. He was under constant attack from pagan Prussian tribes to the north, so he invited the knights to come to his lands. He offered them territory in exchange for protecting his people and converting them to Christianity. The Teutonic Knights agreed, but they had ambitions far beyond missionary work. With the Pope's support and the Emperor's agreement, they started creating their own religious state. In this war-torn land, the sword would spread the cross. They built a new stronghold to make their rule stronger, brick by brick. Marienburg, later known as Malbork. Mary's castle was named after the Virgin Mary, who is the patron saint of the order. They started building it in 1274, and from the start, it was meant for everyone. This was not just a fortress. It was a declaration, built using the distinctive red Gothic brick style of Northern Europe. It rose from the banks of the Nogat River like a crusader's dream made real, its walls able to keep out pagans and rebels. They would tell everyone in the area about the knights' spiritual and military strength. Malbork was more than just a castle. It was used as a base for operations, a monastery, an administrative center, and a symbol of a religious empire that was growing. The warrior monks were no longer foreign guests. They were the rulers. This castle, which was still very young, would one day become the largest fortress in the world by land area and a symbol of medieval power that still exists today. By the late 13th century, Malbork Castle was more than just a place where you could easily get to the area. It was becoming a very big and impressive building that showed the power and faith of the people who had built it, and also how clever the architects were. Rising from the flatlands of the Vistula Delta, it stood tall and clear to see. A fortress built not of stone, but of brick, the bold material of the north. In an age where most castles were made of limestone and granite, Malbork's red Gothic walls showed that they were both innovative and intimidating. The Teutonic Knights weren't just looking for a stronghold. They wanted a special building where they could worship and also fight in wars. The layout showed this difference. The building was built in 3 sections. There are 3 castles: the High Castle, the Middle Castle, and the Lower Castle, each walled and fortified, each serving a different purpose. The High Castle, which was the spiritual center, had the chapel, the chapter house, and the monks' living quarters. This was where the knights lived, prayed, and planned. The building's design was inspired by religion. The narrow windows let in filtered light, casting long shadows on the cold stone floors. The ceilings were high and arched like cathedral ceilings. The features that were meant to be used for defense were also used as spiritual metaphors. In the Bible, being tall was seen as a sign of being close to God. Darkness and light symbolized divine truth against the chaos outside the walls. Malbork wasn't just meant to withstand siege. It was meant to be awe-inspiring. The Holy Virgin Church, tucked away in the High Castle, had beautiful stained glass, detailed tile work, and a huge statue of the Virgin Mary that loomed above the outer walls. Every turret, passageway, and tower was built with a specific purpose in mind. Nothing was left to chance. Even the toilets drained into the Nogat River, showing that the knights had brought order and cleanliness to a land they thought was wild and untamed. At the start of the 14th century, Malbork was still getting bigger. People who worked with their hands, like craftsmen, laborers, and stonemasons, worked all year round. Local people were often forced to provide food, wood, and workers. At the same time, the fortress became the center of the Teutonic or state, with administrative and spiritual activities. Malbork was more than just a castle. It was a clear declaration of the order's presence, both as warriors and as monks. It was a monastery covered in armor, and it had only just started to grow. As the 14th century went on, Malbork Castle was used for more than just military purposes. It had become the center of a growing theocratic empire. From this strong brick building, the Teutonic Knights spread their control across the Baltic. This meant that what was once a campaign of conversion became a full-scale colonization of territory, people, and resources. The order was like a mix of a kingdom and a corporation. The Grand Master was like a pope and a king in the realm, and he ruled from Malbork with the help of a strict monastic hierarchy. Below him were knights, priests, and lay brothers. These people had made promises to live a simple life, to remain pure, and to do whatever was told by others. But they were also in charge of huge estates, trade routes, and tax systems. Their goal wasn't only religious. It was about taking over land. Forests were cleared, towns were built, and paganism was forced underground or destroyed. Malbork was the most important place for this effort, both in symbol and in practice. Here, the chapter house met to talk about policies, elect new Grand Masters, and decide on matters of war and diplomacy. The castle's treasury was protected by a guard and held gold, silver, and religious objects that had been obtained through donations, trade, or by taking them from other people. Its armies gave swords and armor to new crusades into Lithuania and beyond. As its influence grew, the order started to see itself as a way of bringing order to the world. Roads and bridges were built. Trade was very important along the Vistula River. German settlers were encouraged to move there and build towns with Gothic cathedrals and markets based on the Holy Roman Empire. The region became known for its strict order under the rule of the Black Cross, rather than for its pagan past. But with power came enemies. Poland and Lithuania were still mainly pagan and fiercely independent, and they resisted the order's attempts to expand. While some people were happy to convert, others fought against being forced to convert and against being controlled by foreigners. The borderlands became battlegrounds. There were a lot of raids. Things were getting a bit tense. However, from the safety of Malbork's thick walls, the Teutonic Knights seemed invincible. The Teutonic Order was very powerful and controlled a lot of land. It stretched from the Baltic Sea in the west to somewhere in Eastern Europe in the east. And at the very center stood Malbork. It was more than just a castle. It was the capital of a religious state. It was a monument to faith, power, and imperial ambition. But people rarely let others get in the way of their ambition. By the start of the 15th century, the Teutonic Order was growing quickly, and this made some people very angry. Malbork Castle, with its brick towers and iron gates, was built in a time of war and faith. But the knights had made powerful enemies. Most importantly, the two countries of Poland and Lithuania, which had now become one country again. In 1386, there was a big change. The Grand Duke of Lithuania, Jogaila, converted to Christianity and married the Polish queen. This meant he became King Władysław II Jagiella of Poland. This meant that Lithuania, the last pagan country in Europe, became a Christian country. This meant that the order no longer had a good reason to start a crusade. The beliefs that the Teutonic Knights were based on started to become less strong. But it wasn't just about religion. It was about land, power, and getting even. Lithuania had always refused to be invaded. Poland and its neighbors had disagreements about who owned what land. Now the two kingdoms were joined together by marriage, faith, and politics. They had the strength to confront the knights directly. This led to border raids. The fighting got worse and worse, and it became a war. The showdown was unavoidable. In 1410, it came. The Battle of Grunwald, also known as the Battle of Tannenberg, was a huge medieval battle in Europe. It saw a large army made up of Polish and Lithuanian troops fight the Teutonic Knights, and it was one of the bloodiest battles ever fought in Europe. The knights, wearing heavy armor and feeling confident, were tricked. Their army was completely defeated. Their grandmaster, Ulrich Vonningen, was killed in the fight. The defeat was a big shock for the Order's territories. But the Polish-Lithuanian alliance didn't stop at victory. They marched straight towards Malbork, hoping to win the battle. As the enemy army got closer, Malbork got ready. It had tall walls, lots of supplies, and its defenders were determined. The new Grandmaster, Heinrich von Plauen, a clever planner, took charge. Siege engines were built, defenses were made stronger, and archers got ready. For 2 months, the Allied armies tried to break through Malbork's defenses, but the castle held strong. Arrows rained down from the battlements. Oil is boiling from the holes. The attackers were hindered by disease and supply shortages. In the end, the besieging army left. Though bruised, the Order survived for now. But Grunwald was the moment things changed. They no longer felt invincible. Malbork's walls had held up during the siege, but the empire they were protecting was starting to crumble. Malbork Castle survived the siege of 1410, but the Teutonic Order was never the same. They lost a big battle called Grunwald, which made people think they were no longer the strongest. The once growing power of their religious empire started to decrease. Their territories were still huge, and their fortress was impossible to get into, but they were slowly losing their power. Then all of a sudden, they lost all their power. The order was finding it hard to cope with its debts, the money it had to pay for the war, and problems in its own country. To pay for their defense and rebuild their armies, they imposed heavy taxes on their subjects, especially on the growing class of German-speaking merchants and townspeople. But being loyal had its limits. People in Prussia were unhappy because they were poor and the knights were acting more and more like dictators. In 1454, things got really bad. A group of powerful Prussian nobles and cities, who were fed up with the order's rule, asked King Casimir IV of Poland to take their lands into the Polish crown. The king agreed, which started the 13 Years' War. This was a brutal and drawn-out conflict that would decide the fate of Malbork and the Teutonic state. At first, order stayed the same. Malbork was still their most valuable asset, their stronghold, but things were starting to go against them. The Polish army, supported by the rebellious Prussian League, advanced deep into the territory of the Teutonic people. The knights were unable to pay their mercenaries, which was a big mistake. In 1457, the Teutonic Order was close to bankruptcy. They hired troops at Malbork, mostly Bohemian mercenaries, and sold the castle to the Polish king. They did not use swords or siege towers, but silver to do so. Poland walked through Malbork's gates, not as conquerors, but as buyers. The most powerful castle in Christendom had been captured without a fight. The Teutonic Knights went back to Königsberg. Their state was fractured and humiliated, though not completely destroyed. Malbork, which had been the center of a militant order, was now a royal residence for the Polish monarchy. From this point on, it would be used by kings, not crusaders. The fall of Malbork meant that the order's imperial dreams were over. Their castle had withstood attacks using catapults, siege engines, and swords, but in the end, it fell because of money and betrayal. The warrior monks were no longer around, and the brick walls that used to be filled with prayers and battle plans were now quiet. When the Teutonic Knights were defeated in 1457, Malbork Castle entered a new era. It used to be used by Crusader monks, but now it is a jewel in the Polish monarchy. King Casimir IV Jagiellon bought the fortress using money instead of fighting for it. He saw Malbork as a useful military asset and a powerful symbol of Poland's growing power against the declining power of the Teutons. Malbork was one of the royal residences of the Polish kings. They particularly liked it because it was big, in a good place, and very impressive. It was built to defend the monastery and to enforce monastic discipline, but its design was actually very suitable for a courtly lifestyle. The Knights' Hall, which was once plain, was decorated with tapestries and banners. Instead of meeting to discuss war, they held parties and meetings with diplomats. The castle was part of the Royal Prussian territories. These territories were semi-autonomous, which means they were partly self-governing, but were still loyal to the Polish crown. This meant that Malbork was in a place where many different cultures met and many people had jobs. The castle's management also changed. Its armies became treasuries, and its watchtowers watched over trade routes, not war paths. During the Polish period, Malbork was carefully restored. New wings were added and defensive features were updated to reflect the changing nature of warfare, particularly the rising threat of gunpowder. Cannon platforms and bastions were added to older Gothic structures, combining medieval design with Renaissance practicality. Even though Malbork was a very important place, it was only used by the royal family for a few months of the year and for special events. The Polish kings mostly stayed in Kiev or Warsaw, but they also visited Malbork sometimes. There, they looked after business in Prussia or met important visitors. The castle became a symbol of unity and success, reminding people of Poland's victory over the Order and its growing power in the Baltic region. Malbork was still an important stronghold in the defense of northern Poland. even though it was not as important for the military. It was a place where soldiers lived, was looked after, and was respected. But people were no longer afraid of it. The fortress had replaced its strict religious rules with elaborate courtly traditions, and its military purpose with political status. Under the banners and fine clothes, the thick walls and deep moats were still there, silent, strong, and waiting. The kings had come, and the castle would not be at peace for much longer. By the start of the 17th century, Malbork Castle was at war again. This time, it's not just a symbol of rising power. It's a prize that all the big players in Northern Europe are fighting over. The Swedish-Polish wars were part of a larger fight for power in the Baltic Sea region, and they would put the fortress to the test. A new Sweden was created under the ambitious kings Gustavus Adolphus and later Charles. They wanted to control the Baltic coastline, which was known as the Dominium Maris Balticae. Poland, with its commonwealth that was spread out but not controlled from one place, was in the way. The wars between the two powers were long and bitter. They were driven by religious differences, family rivalry, and the desire to be the best in the region. In 1626, the Swedes attacked Royal Prussia. Their modern army quickly took control of important cities and ports. Malbork, with its thick walls and good position next to the Nogat River, was a very important place to capture. The castle was still strong, but it was not as strong as it had been in the time of the Teutonic Knights. Cannon fire is now more powerful and accurate than ever before. It could batter down even the sturdiest Gothic walls. In 1656, during a very bad time in Poland called the Deluge, Malbork finally fell. Swedish troops entered the fortress, not to attack it, but because the defenders had surrendered. The castle, with no one to defend it and little food and supplies, could not hold out for very long. Once again, Malbork was taken over without a big fight, but the impact was still huge. During the Swedish occupation, the castle was looted and damaged. Valuable artifacts, treasures, and archives were taken to Stockholm. The halls of diplomacy and faith, which were once respected, were filled with the sound of foreign footsteps. For the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, this loss was not just about losing land. It was a very meaningful moment. Malbork had stood as a symbol of Polish power for 200 years. Now, it was another victim of a nation under attack. The Swedes held the castle for several years, but Poland took it back after a long and costly battle. But the damage was already done. Malbork was now a fortress marked by occupation. Its role as a royal seat was fading, and you could still see the damage in the broken walls and empty chapels. War had returned, and Malbork had weathered the storm, but not without damage. By the 18th century, Malbork Castle, which had been the center of a military and religious community and later a symbol of Polish kingship, had fallen out of favor. The political world around it was falling apart. The Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth was a weak state. It was divided into parts because there were arguments within the country and other countries were trying to control it. In 1795, it was completely taken over and disappeared from the map. Malbork, like much of the region, was absorbed by the expanding Kingdom of Prussia. When the Prussians ruled the area, the castle was not important for fighting. Gunpowder warfare had made medieval fortresses mostly useless. Malbork was no longer a royal seat, and it no longer symbolized conquest. It was a huge, old building that cost a lot of money to look after, and it was difficult to change it to make it more modern. The Russian authorities found new, everyday uses for its huge halls and echoing chambers. The chapel, where the Knights of the Order of the Golden Fleece had prayed, was used as a warehouse. The refectories were turned into barracks. They even took out some of the fancy interior design to make space for storage and military supplies. Some structures were completely taken apart, with the bricks being used again in other buildings nearby. People treated the castle less as a historic monument and more as a useful source of materials. People started to forget what it used to be like. For hundreds of years, the country's religious, political, and military history was forgotten and ignored. Visitors saw that the towers were falling apart, the arches had collapsed, and the walls were covered in ivy. The fortress, once full of pride, was now little more than a remnant of its former glory. It was too big to ignore, but too expensive to restore. But even when it was declining, Malbork never completely disappeared. People from Germany and other countries sometimes came to see how big it was, drew pictures of it, and were amazed by how grand it used to be. Romantic-era artists and writers were fascinated by medieval ruins and tales of chivalry. They started to see the castle not as useless, but as something that would never change, a reminder of a more heroic time in the past. But the castle was still mostly left alone, with no one to defend it or rule it, and no one to celebrate it. Malbork stood there without saying anything. The walls that had once been filled with the sounds of battle, parades, and royal orders now only had dust, shadows, and memories. It would take a new century, a growing interest in national identity, and a love of history to make its old bricks feel new again. In the 19th century, people started to live in Malbork Castle again after a long time. At the same time, Europe was becoming more focused on its own history, particularly the medieval period. Ruins became relics. People started to feel very proud of their forgotten fortresses. This is what the Germans are looking for now, a unified identity. Malbork, or Marienburg, was a symbol of the power of the Teutonians and of chivalry. The restoration began in earnest in the 1800s, led by Prussian architects and historians who saw in the old bricks not just a building, but a story. A lot of detailed studies were done. The old Gothic designs have been changed. Sections were rebuilt carefully to look medieval, but often with a bit of artistic freedom from the 19th century added. The process wasn't always accurate. Some things were made to look better than they really were, but the feeling of excitement and new life was strong. Malbork became a national monument of the German Empire. Paintings, operas, and textbooks showed it as the home of the Teutonic people. German emperors visited, and ceremonies were held in its big halls. It was more than just a castle. It was a combination of history, legend, and architecture, all rolled into one striking symbol. But things would change again in the future. After World War I, the region was fought over. After World War II, it changed. In 1945, as Soviet forces moved into East Prussia, Malbork was subjected to intense bombing. Fires destroyed the insides, and the walls fell down. Once again, the castle was at war, and once again it was left in ruins. After the war, Malbork became part of a new Poland, and its identity changed again. It is no longer a symbol of German pride. It has become a piece of Polish history that has been reclaimed, not for conquest, but for preservation. After the war, the Polish government did another huge restoration project. This time, we're focusing on being true to history and including different cultures. It was rebuilt brick by brick, not as a place to wage war, but as a symbol of how strong the people were. Malbork Castle is the largest brick fortress in the world. It is a UNESCO World Heritage Site and a testament to almost 8 centuries of European history. Tourists walk around its courtyards. Historians study the layers of the earth. Its walls, once dirty with fighting and politics, now echo with the voices of school children and the quiet awe of visitors. Malbork doesn't defend. It remembers. In the early 1800s, the United States was a young nation with big ambitions. Its eastern cities were getting bigger, but for many Americans, The real promise was in the land beyond the Appalachian Mountains, in the huge, untamed wilderness of the West. This desire to expand was more than just a personal ambition. It was based on a national philosophy called manifest destiny. The belief that Americans were destined to settle from the Atlantic to the Pacific, no matter what or who got in their way. What started as a small group of people who wanted to live off the land soon became a big movement. Thousands of families left home to go and live on the frontier. They traveled by wagon, on horseback, or by foot. They were looking for cheap land, new opportunities, and a better life. People were promised fertile soil, freedom, and ownership. Everyone is waiting for the bold to take action. But the journey west was not for people who get scared easily. Pioneers had to travel for weeks or even months. People used trails like the Oregon Trail, Santa Fe Trail, and California Trail to cross mountains, rivers, and plains. Supplies were packed tightly into wagons. These wagons were people's homes and also their way to work. There were dangers all around. Things like river crossings, animal attacks, broken axles, and disease could happen at any time. But the pull of the West was still too strong. For many people, the idea of taking a piece of land was more than just getting it for themselves. It was a chance to make a fresh start. A poor tenant farmer could become a landowner. If you were an immigrant with no money, you could start a new life. On the frontier, there were no neighbors to impress, no aristocracy to navigate, only raw land and the will to tame it. The frontier was also a place of contradiction. It promised to give people freedom, but it made indigenous peoples lose their land because it was now thought of as wilderness. It offered opportunity, but only for those who were strong or lucky enough to survive. But the idea of the frontier, of strong people facing challenges, became a part of who Americans thought they were. For the first people to live there, life on the frontier was real. It was not just a dream. It was risky, but they took a chance. Once they had finished traveling west, if they had even managed to do that, the real work began. The American frontier was not like the home of a typical settler, with houses and fields ready and waiting. It offered only trees, soil, weather, and time. For early settlers, building a home meant changing a wild area into a place where they could live, starting with the most basic thing, a place to shelter. People chose log cabins because they were practical, not because they were comfortable. There were lots of trees, but not many tools. A family might arrive at their chosen plot with only an axe, a wagon of supplies, and a lot of determination. First, they cleared the land. Then the logs were fitted together without nails and secured with mud and moss. Roofs were often made of split logs or thatched grass. Windows were rare and expensive. If they were there, they were small and often covered with greased paper instead of glass. Life was tough, but it had a purpose. One-room cabins were where whole families lived, sometimes with more than a dozen people, all in the same house. Privacy was almost non-existent. People cooked over open fires, and smoke often filled the small space. Bedding might be straw stuffed into cloth sacks. The furniture was made from rough-hewn wood and was homemade. Everything had a purpose. There was no room for decoration, only survival. But even in these difficult conditions, life began to take shape. People planted gardens and raised small animals like chickens. Children collected firewood and brought water from nearby streams. Women were responsible for cooking, preserving food, spinning cloth, and caring for the sick. Men hunted, trapped animals, built fences, and defended their homes when needed. Each season brought new jobs, working in the fields, planting crops, harvesting them, chopping wood, and preserving food for winter. Rest was rare. There were not many other houses nearby, but when they did exist, they were very useful. Frontier families often worked together. They might build barns, help each other give birth, or gather for seasonal harvests. Survival depended on independence and on people helping each other. On the American frontier, nature was both a source of life and a source of danger. The land had the potential to be fruitful, but it did not automatically provide what was needed. Every meal, every warm fire, and every drop of clean water had to be earned. It took a lot of hard work, skill, and stamina. There were no markets, no electricity, and no food in people's kitchens. Just think about things that could be grown, gathered, hunted, or preserved. Food was something you thought about every day, not something you could just go out and get. In the early months of settlement, many families relied on hardtack, salted pork, dried beans, and flour brought from the east. These supplies were very important, but there was not much left. The long-term solution was to be self-sufficient. Gardens were planted as soon as the ground thawed. People ate corn, beans, squash, and potatoes a lot. People grew herbs for two reasons: to make food taste better and to treat medical problems. Nothing went to waste. If they don't have enough to eat, it can be really bad. Meat came from the wilderness. Men and older boys hunted deer, rabbits, wild turkeys, and sometimes larger animals like bison. We set traps for smaller animals. Fishing in nearby streams provided vital protein, especially during the warm months. Every kill was a win. Every time you find food, it's a small win against the unknown. But nature's gifts came with danger. Bears, wolves, and mountain lions also lived in the area, and starvation was a real risk in a bad year. Keeping food for winter was very important. It was a way of making sure that people were comfortable and had enough to eat. People used smokehouses, root cellars, and drying racks to keep meat, vegetables, and fruits edible during the winter. Women boiled jars of jam, cured pork with salt, and pickled anything that could fit in a barrel. By autumn, there was a lot of firewood stacked up. The hearth was the center of life. It was where people cooked and where they lived. The weather was often unpredictable and severe. Heavy rain could flood crops. Blizzards could keep families apart for weeks. Droughts turned gardens to dust. Lightning hit the cabins. Tornadoes destroyed them. If water froze or spoiled, illness would spread quickly. There were no safety nets, only preparation, luck, and resilience. People often think of life on the frontier as lonely and difficult, but most pioneers did not live alone. Survival might start with a single cabin, but over time, these small communities grew into something bigger. People who live in the same area have to work together to get things done, and they trust each other. They also have to deal with the same problems, like making the land better. Neighbors, though apart, were important. In places where there are no formal institutions, families who live farthest from other people have to rely on each other. Barn raisings, harvests, log rolling, and quilting bees were more than just chores. They were social events. A dozen men could build a structure in a day. Women would prepare food, take care of children, and share news from far away. These moments brought people closer together. They all worked together to survive. Before there were newspapers, telegraphs, or town criers, news traveled by word of mouth. A traveling trader or someone visiting from a nearby settlement could tell stories from hundreds of miles away. Things like political changes, rumors of war, sightings of native tribes, or news of a harsh winter coming. Information spread quickly between the cabins. When a family received a letter, they would often read it out loud to their friends and neighbors. This was because they wanted to share the news about what was happening in the world. Religion brought people together. Itinerant preachers, also known as circuit riders, traveled long distances to deliver sermons in simple buildings like cabins or barns, or even in open fields. Families would walk for hours to attend a Sunday service, which would last all day and involve praying, singing, and getting together with friends. Faith gave comfort and helped people to have strong beliefs in a world where the law was still being created. Education was rare, but important. When enough children lived nearby, their families would work together to build a school. A young woman or older child might teach using a Bible, a slate, and whatever few books were available. Events in the community, like spelling bees and parties, made people happy even though life was hard. Life on the frontier was not only a struggle against nature. It was also a meeting of different peoples, cultures, and people who claimed the land. As settlers moved westward, they entered areas where Native American tribes had been living for a long time. For the early settlers, the land was a promise. For indigenous peoples, it was their home. The result was a tense, often violent balance between conflict and coexistence. Some encounters were peaceful. People often traded along the main roads. People who settled there traded metal tools, cloth, or guns for furs, food, and knowledge about the local area. Native guides sometimes helped families find their way through unfamiliar terrain or warned them of incoming storms. There were times when they were really friends, ate meals together, gave each other gifts, and understood each other without needing to speak the same language. But these moments were delicate, and the pressure of growth would put them under a lot of strain. As more and more people settled down to live in the area, there were arguments about who owned the land and who had the best resources. People who came to live there cut down trees, changed the direction of rivers, hunted animals, and did not think about the fact that these lands were very important to the spiritual, economic, and ancestral life of the native nations who had lived there for thousands of years. Treaties were signed, then broken. Promises were made, but then not kept. This made things more tense. There were raids on both sides. Some settlers were afraid of being attacked at night. People made their homes stronger. Rifles were kept close. Children are taught to stay quiet and hidden. Stories of violence, whether true or not, spread quickly and made people afraid. At the same time, indigenous communities saw their lands get smaller, their hunting grounds disappear, and their way of life under threat from unfamiliar laws and permanent fences. People joined together to form militias. Forts were built. This led to a lot of conflicts. They fought each other in small disputes, and even in big wars like the Black Hawk War and the conflicts along the Oregon Trail. Others tried talking things through or moved further west, only to find more settlers in time. There was no easy answer, but even during conflicts, there were still times when they worked together. Some Native Americans worked with the settlers, got married into their families, or converted to Christianity. Some settlers learned about farming from the native people, used traditional medicines, or found ways to survive the winter. The frontier was a place where the rules were unclear. Sometimes there is war, sometimes there is peace. On the American frontier, people often survived because they were strong and resilient. And no one showed these qualities more quietly and completely than the women who lived in the wild. Many stories about the American West focus on men who traveled alone or fought off wolves. But it was the hard work, smarts, and stamina of women that kept frontier life going. Women had many roles to play and did so day after day. They were mothers, doctors, teachers, farmers, hunters, and protectors. They worked from sunrise to long after sunset. A wife who was a pioneer might start her day by lighting the fire, feeding the cow, and making breakfast. She used to make butter, mend clothes, look after children, gather herbs, and take care of the garden. In emergencies, she delivered babies, treated wounds, and sat with the dying, even though she had no formal training and often no help. But women weren't just stuck at home. Many women worked in the fields alongside their husbands, chopped wood, or helped to build cabins. Some hunted small animals. Others drove wagons during the westward journey, managing oxen and navigating rugged terrain when men were injured or away. When a wife died, which was not unusual, the husband often had to look after the family farm alone. He had to grow crops and raise children with a lot of determination. Women also brought culture, learning, and continuity. In places where there were no schools, they taught their children to read and write using family Bibles and borrow books. They kept diaries, wrote letters, and recorded recipes and remedies. These documents are now valuable historical records. They show us the human side of the frontier, like the desire for community, the fight against loneliness, and the quiet pride in something as simple as a well-baked loaf or a warm quilt. They were also very important to many communities on the frontier. Women set up prayer meetings, holiday gatherings, and networks to help each other. When a neighbor was sick, they brought food and support. When a child died, they all dug the graves and mourned together. They were strong, but not in a loud way. They were always there, like a hearth fire. For children on the American frontier, life was not about toys or school books. It was about responsibility, resilience, and resourcefulness. From a young age, children were expected to help their families survive. Childhood was short and difficult, often involving hard work, long winters, and the challenges of a wild and changing environment. Children living on the frontier did not have much time for playing. Instead, they did jobs to help their families. Boys were taught to chop wood, hunt small animals, take care of livestock, and protect the home. Girls would help with things like cooking, spinning, milking cows, gardening, and caring for younger brothers and sisters. Even children as young as 5 had tasks to complete before breakfast. There was little room for rest when everyone was needed. But childhood on the frontier wasn't all bad. Children found time to play with what they had. A doll made from rags, a wooden animal that has been carved by hand, or a hoop and stick. They invented games using things like stones, sticks, or their imagination. They often drew on stories told around the hearth. Events like harvests or barn dances were the only times when children were able to have fun and meet others in their area. Education was a privilege, not something that was guaranteed. In many regions, there were no schools at all. Where schools did exist, they were often just one room with a teacher for all the children. Lessons were short, and school terms were often planned around the time of year, when people were planting and harvesting crops. Books were rare, and paper was even rarer. Children learned by saying things out loud, writing on slates, and remembering verses, often from the Bible. Even though frontier life was hard, it taught children important values that they kept with them as they grew up. Being self-reliant, disciplined, thrifty, and tough. Children learned to care for animals, cook meals, and repair tools. They did not do these things for fun, but because they needed to survive. They saw birth, death, and natural disasters. They often saw these things without protection or explanation. These experiences made them much more mature than their age. Winter on the American frontier was not a short season. It was a test of everything the family had been preparing for. When the first snow fell, the frontier changed. The paths were no longer there, the rivers were frozen, the trees were bare, and even the thickest wool was cut by the wind. For weeks, or even months, they were completely alone, and they only survived thanks to what they had done before the cold weather arrived. The cabins were made stronger. Cracks in the walls were filled with moss, clay, or cloth. There was a lot of firewood stacked up. There was so much snow that it was hard to get to the cords, which were very cold. It was dangerous to go out for more because you could get frostbite or even worse. The hearth became the most important part of the home. The fire burned all the time, keeping the cabin warm and cooking the food. This made everything feel a bit normal, even though it was very cold. It was very important to keep food fresh. Families who didn't salt enough meat, dry enough vegetables, or store enough grain often went hungry. Deep holes were dug for the roots, insulated with straw, and filled with potatoes, onions, and jars of jam. The meals were simple but filling. There was enough stew, cornbread, dried fruit, and beans to last everyone. But loneliness was also dangerous. It might feel like weeks go by without seeing anyone. Snow drifts made it hard to travel. Letters from the east coast of America were slow to arrive, or sometimes didn't arrive at all. The woods were very quiet. Some people, especially women and children, found the loneliness unbearable. People often felt unwell, worried, and sad, but they didn't talk about it. Families used what they had to pass the time, telling stories, reading the Bible, mending clothes, carving tools, or repairing quilts. Children played quietly indoors, learning to entertain themselves without much space or distraction. Every day was marked by the glow of the fires and the stores in the cellar. But even in the coldest conditions, endurance took root. Winter was a time to wait for the sun to rise a little earlier, for the snow to melt, for the ground to become soft again under boots that had been worn all day. When spring finally came, with its flowing streams and returning birds, the families living on the frontier came out of their cabins. They were thinner but alive. By the late 19th century, the American frontier was starting to disappear. Railroads go across the plains. Towns grew up where there were forests, and the wilderness was split up into plots of land. But the ideas, beliefs, and stories of the frontier continued long after the last wagon had gone west. The U.S. Census of 1890 officially announced that the frontier was closed. People had moved into the land. It had been mapped, and it had been claimed. Homesteads became farms, cabins became towns, and territories became states. What was once a dangerous and unpredictable edge of civilization was now part of the middle of the nation. But the story of the frontier was still very important to American identity and was shaped by those who had experienced it. The people who settled the frontier left behind more than log cabins and split rail fences. They left a country with a strong national character, built on the idea that people can be self-reliant, determined, and innovative. The idea that you could build a life from scratch was central to the American dream. The frontier ideal was all about hard work, personal freedom, and being independent. These values can still be seen in modern culture, politics, and folklore. But this legacy was complicated. The same growth that created opportunities for new settlers also had a very negative effect on the native people who already lived there. Tribes were forced to leave their homes, treaties were broken, and cultures were disrupted or destroyed. The landscape was completely different afterwards. Forests were cleared, rivers were redirected, and wildlife was hunted almost to extinction. The success of the frontier had permanent consequences, but people still remember these stories. People kept the memory of those early years alive by sharing stories, both written and oral, as well as family legends. Pioneers became icons. Men like Daniel Boone and Davy Crockett. Women like Laura Ingalls Wilder are great role models. Their lives are made into books, songs, and later films. The reality was often worse than the story, but the story was important. Today, traces of the frontier can still be seen. Old cabins, tracks made by wagons, and gravestones that have been carved by hand. Museums and historic sites preserve artifacts. But the most important legacy of the frontier is the feeling of possibility that it inspired. The idea that anyone, no matter where they're from, can begin again, face challenges, and create something valuable in the process.